this did work. All right, welcome everybody. It is Thursday morning already, and we are here this morning. This first witness is Cam Wood. Cam, if you can join us. I'm sorry, is it Cameron or Cam?
Cameron, Cam, whatever's easier.
Okay, well.
I go by Cameron. Most people call me Cam because it's easy. So,
and we could say Director Wood as well. So we've been working on H66, which is our paid family and medical leave insurance and bill. And one of the questions that just came up in conversation, one of the concerns that just came up in conversation was the notion of fraud with programs that would be like family medical leave, which we have as unemployment and workers' compensation. And while neither of them are quite the same, it's the same feeling that someone, in order to take more than what they're qualified for, what they're entitled to. And so we took testimony yesterday from a group nationally that talked specifically about family medical leave insurance. But we just wanted to get your testimony on the existence of fraud of some sort, whatever passes for fraud in the UI and the workers' compensation program. And really, while I don't want to ignore what happened since 2020 when everything was blown up. I do want to focus on what we would consider the normal times and what your experiences were with any fraud or possible fraud, and then how things are enforced. How do you find out about fraud? How are things enforced? How do we prevent them? We heard yesterday for medical leave insurance that there are many levels of work that need to go in to even apply for insurance. We don't quite have as many, but then we don't know exactly what we have already. So we've introduced ourselves to you already in previous visits, so the microphone is yours. Welcome back.
good morning. Happy Thursday. For the record, Cameron Wood. I'm the Policy and Legislative Affairs Director for the Department of Labor, and I also serve as the Unemployment Insurance Director, and I've been in that capacity for coming up on 7 years. So happy to talk to you this morning. Wish it was a better topic, but this is the reality that we face every day in the unemployment insurance program. I will also introduce quickly Dirk Anderson, who is the department's Workers' Compensation and Safety Division Director. Dirk also formerly the department's General Counsel, so is kind of fully aware of the issues that we face. This morning, quick 30 minutes here with you all, so I'm primarily going to focus on unemployment insurance. Primarily because, in talking with Dirk on the workers' compensation workers' comp side, if the department is made aware of, a tip or a claim of fraudulent activity from a workers' comp claimant, we would refer that issue to the carrier to actually investigate. So it's a little bit different in the sense of unemployment insurance. We, Department of Labor, are the ones responsible for actually paying the benefits out, whereas in the workers' compensation and safety side, there's a third-party carrier that's involved that's making those payments. So that third-party carrier would, if they do an investigation, they would then submit a written report that the department gets to review in that event. But Dirk, you can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but we just generally don't see a lot of fraudulent activity or activity that rises to the level of fraud in the workers' compensation and safety program. So today I'm primarily going to focus on unemployment insurance. I'll give a quick brief overview of kind of the UI process and talk a little bit about how we investigate fraud. I want to start though by highlighting that, there are coming out of the pandemic, there are two instances of fraud that I think you need to be aware of that we combat on a daily basis. Prior to the pandemic, we were primarily dealing with programmatic fraud, individuals who are filing for unemployment, for example, and may be working and not reporting their earnings to us, or they may have lied about their separation to make themselves eligible for unemployment. We'll call that kind of programmatic fraud. During the pandemic and subsequent to the pandemic, there has been an explosion of identity theft fraud. I'm sure you all have read about, instances across the country in the unemployment insurance program where we had, third parties, criminal organizations in some instances using stolen claimant identities and using those identities to file and try to collect benefits. So I just want to highlight for the committee that you need to be aware of those two separate things, and both of them exist. And I can imagine in any sort of paid family leave program that moves forward, they will be combating both of those as we are today. So on the identity theft piece, it is trying to implement certain checks and balances to ensure that the person who is filing for the benefits is who they say they are. There are different ways of doing that. One thing that we have done in the past, and we currently do in unemployment insurance, is we actually require the individual to call to establish their initial claim. That actually has had a pretty significant effect on preventing bot attacks. So if you have a strictly online application, then criminals can actually design programs that will just sit there and submit fraudulent activity against your system, and it can overwhelm your system in a lot of instances. And you can read about different states that have experienced that. But other things that can be done, you can put, and we at the department are working on putting identity proofing mechanisms in place. So when individuals do file electronically and they create their account, they have to go through certain steps to identify themselves. And I'm probably not the expert to come in and talk to you about that. So I'm gonna stay away from that a little bit, but happy to answer any questions. I'm primarily going to talk about programmatic fraud, which are individuals who are just trying to take it. They are who they say they are, and they're just trying to take advantage of the system that we have. In unemployment insurance, individual files a claim for benefits. We have certain checks and balances in place to try to prevent programmatic fraud. So first thing we do, we send a separation form to the employer. The employer has the right to respond to that and let us know information regarding the person's separation, for example. Person may claim that they were laid off. Turns out they were fired for stealing. We give the employer the opportunity to provide us with information that may be contrary to what the claimant has provided us. So I could see a similar situation needing to be put in place if this bill were to move forward, whereby you're informing the employer, giving the employer some sort of opportunity to provide information. That can also help stop identity theft. I mean, we ran into that a lot during the pandemic, where we would send the separation form to the employer and the employer would respond to us and say, this person is still working for me. They haven't been laid off. And so that could tip us to determine whether or not that person's identity had been stolen. In unemployment insurance, so you're all aware, it is a weekly program. So you are filing every week that you are unemployed. So it's, I haven't done a deep dive on H66, but my understanding is it's a little bit different. Bi-weekly payments, so just understand
as if they were paychecks, yeah.
A little bit apples to oranges in UI, but in UI, you're filing on a weekly basis. And keep in mind, in unemployment, you are required to be able to work, available to work, actively seeking work. And so a little bit different to what your eligibility parameters would be in H66. But we ask specific questions on that weekly claim. So we ask, are you able and available to work? We ask if you worked to report any hours that you worked, any wages that you earned on a weekly basis. We ask if you have quit a job, been fired from a job, been laid off from a job. We try to encourage people to work part-time while they're unemployed. And so we have to ask those questions to determine whether or not they're still eligible in a given week. So we have two separate units. in our department that primarily deal with quality control and fraud prevention. One of them is called the Program Integrity Unit, and their job is to specifically audit claimants to determine eligibility. So again, keep in mind, it's a little bit apples to oranges comparison, but for us, individuals who are unemployed have to report their hours and their earnings. And that's primarily where we find the most programmatic fraud, are people who are claiming to be unemployed, filing for unemployment and receiving benefits while they're working part-time or working full-time and still earning a paycheck. And so when you're working part-time, that impacts your overall weekly benefit amount and can reduce your weekly benefit amount by a certain dollar amount. That's primarily where we see our fraud, is in that area where people are failing to report that information to us. So what we do is, on a quarterly basis throughout the year, we will take the wages that have been reported to us by employers. The Vermont Department of Labor has all of the wage record information for employers across the state. And it's something I think this committee will need to look into or be aware. And when I did an initial pass through of age 66, there is a little, the individual's potential wage reimbursement amount is based on past wages. And so that information, I think, would have to come from the Department of Labor unless you're getting it from some other source. So we have quarterly wage record information, and we're the only entity in the state that has that level of detail. So we take that information that employers provide us on a quarterly basis, the wages that they've paid to their employees. We cross-match that against the claimants who have filed and reported wages. And if there is a discrepancy, we can then investigate from there. From there, we would send a notice to the claimant asking them information. We would send a separate notice to the employer asking for a detail of wage information. And then we would, further our investigation from that point. So those are some things that we do. We cross-match against new hire information. We cross-match against corrections information to try to prevent people who may be incarcerated from filing. We cross-match against certain vital record information to ensure that people are not, unfortunately, continuing to file for people who have deceased. And then we do our wage cross-match. Those are our primary cross-match mechanisms that we do. And then again, if we have a reason to investigate, we'll look at it from there. So I'm happy to take any questions regarding process as we move along. Please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. And I also can talk a little bit about numbers. So, yes, sir.
Since this is, that quarterly cross-checking, something that you do already, sounds like something that the paid family leave program would also have to do. Is there a precedent or a mechanism for one organization doing that cross-checking and then sharing the information, or would separate divisions have to do their own?
So whether it's a requirement, I think would be up to the language in the bill if it were to pass, whether or not you're expecting individuals who are on paid family leave to be reporting any sort of income that they may be earning while collecting. For us, it's important because that directly impacts their underlying eligibility for unemployment. If you're employed and working, you're not unemployed. If you're working what we consider full-time. And again, the kind of premise behind the unemployment insurance program, it's a wage replacement. And so if you're earning wages, then, that should impact your overall weekly benefit amount. So that, I think, would just initially depend on how a potential program would be designed, by you all, of whether or not there would be similar expectations. We have a pretty supportive, I'll call it, disregards earning here in Vermont. So what I mean by that is when a claimant is filing for benefits, we disregard 50% of their earnings, and then we take the other 50% and we deduct that from their weekly benefit amount. So think about it, if you're earning $200 a week, we take $100, disregard it. The other $100 we would deduct from your weekly benefit amount dollar for dollar. That's actually a pretty generous disregard when you look at us comparative to other states. I think it used to be either 25 or 35%, and then it was increased up to 50%. To your specific question, we do our own internal cross matches because it's part of our program integrity, program. We could not do those similar cross matches for another entity. And so if another entity were to do that, let me back up. I mean, in theory, we could, but the state would have to pay for that service. We could not do that with our federal administrative dollars covering the costs. And what I would say is we do not have the staff to be able to do that for another agency as we're currently staffed. We don't have enough staff to do as much as we would like to do internally. So then the question is, can we potentially share wage record information with another entity, another state entity, to be able to do their own cross-match work? The answer there is yes, we can. We may want to look at the language that is in the unemployment insurance chapter to just make sure that it's explicit that we have the authority to share that information. And then what I would imagine is, we would get Social Security numbers from the paid family leave program. We would cross match that, and then we would share any hits that we received at that time with that entity to then allow them to go further investigate from there. So it's possible that cross match, the work that goes into that entity, whoever's asking for that, would have to pay for that service as well, just so you know. That's part of our federal program requirements. We currently share information with the tax department, for example. We share information with other entities that provide, public service, economic services division, for example. So we do share our wage record information with others for similar purposes. And part of our federal program requirements are we have to have an MOU in place, and then they have to kind of pay for the cost to the Department of Labor for providing that service. Okay, I'm going to jump into.
When someone files for unemployment and they are to be looking for employment, is there a number of places, like per week, that they're supposed to apply to for a position? And if so, do you check with those businesses to see if that is it?
So we currently, right now, we, Department of Labor, have a lot of discretion in what we can mandate someone to do in looking for work. The statute is pretty broad. It gives the commissioner pretty broad authority. Historically, and this has not been changed since I've been in my position, we require individuals who are unemployed, fully unemployed, to do 3 job contacts per week. Historically, that has been a little outdated, I think the department would say, in the sense of, we expect people to actually submit applications. So if you just submit your resume on Indeed.com, for example, that would not count as a job contact. We've had conversations over the past few years and in kind of leading into our modernization system about being a little more flexible with what a work search means. Going to a job fair can count as a work search in some states. Doing a workforce development workshop at the Department of Labor could count as a work search activity. I mean, the goal would be to ensure that people are taking steps to become reemployed. And so we are at the department kind of trying to modernize the way we look at work search language. But in the past and current state would be, if you are fully unemployed, you make 3 job contacts, meaning you have to contact an employer and submit an application for an employer that is hiring. If you are working part-time, we expect your part-time work can count as one of your job contacts. And so you would only be required, instead of doing 3, you'd have to do 2. But we would expect you to be looking for additional work to get you back to full-time. And then there are certain instances where we would waive work search requirements. If somebody has a return to work date, for example, we have the authority to waive work search requirements in those circumstances. To the last point of your question, we do have a mechanism on our website for employers to provide us with information if somebody refuses an offer of work. So it gets a little bit technical in how and when you can investigate someone for a work search issue. We can't mandate that. So it is difficult for us in some instances to mandate that somebody go to a job interview, for example. But if there is an offer of work, if I am unemployed and I apply and the employer offers me a job and says, start on Monday, and I refuse that, that employer can report that information to the department and we would investigate that. Because if we determine that work to be suitable and that claimant refuses that work, that then impacts their potential ability to continue to collect unemployment at that time. So again, we don't have staff capacity to investigate a lot of the work search contacts that are going on. But when there is a report of somebody refusing an offer of work, we will investigate that when it comes to us.
Thank you.
Representative Parsons, then Burrows.
Thank you. That was about half, 3/4 of what I was about to ask. Was what does that look like when you say you have to put in 3 job contacts?
So
How would you know other than them saying or showing a picture of an application? Do you have any what do you do for a look back?
At this point, we don't have the staff capacity to do a significant amount of investigation. So when the person is filing their weekly claim, we ask them, they have to fill out 3 separate job contacts. We ask them who they contacted, name of the business, address, phone number, method, who they spoke with, et cetera. And so it is a kind of self-attestation at that point. I mean, we're not, at this point, because of system limitations, we're not following up to validate that unless there is an indication that somebody is potentially committing fraud or unless there's a refusal of suitable work, as I just described. We don't have the staff or the technology to have a robust cross-match of that at this point in time. Hopefully with a new system, we've discussed ways that we could potentially enhance that. So if employers wanted to opt in, for example, there's a question about how much, we want to be bogging employers down with unemployed issues. But, we could send an email, for example, to the employer to say, Cameron Wood says that they applied for a job last week. Please let us know if that's not accurate. So there's a little bit more that we can do with technology when we get to a new system. But currently right now we accept the information that is presented to us and we will not investigate it unless there's reason to.
Okay. I had another part to that. So there's nothing on the website when you fill it out that, as you said it's kind of a self-attestation to say that you did it. There's nothing like, I know there's certain forms I filled out where you check the box that says penalty saying you did this. Is there anything like that?
When I do not recall on our claimant portal there being any sort of attestation that, what you're saying is, true and accurate and, subject to, fraud. I don't believe so on our current portal. We did add some of that on the new programs that we implemented with PUA, for example. We had a specific box that the person had to check saying that all the information they provided was accurate and they were subject to criminal penalties and fraud, et cetera. I imagine we would look to put more or similar attestation requirements in our new system. We are extremely limited in our ability to make adjustments to the current portal that we have that most claimants use to file their claims. So.
Representative Burrow, then Krasnow, then LaBounty.
Thank you. how many job centers are there around our state?
Historically, the department has operated 12 local career resource centers. At this point, I think some of those are currently not a Department of Labor building. You know, there's a lot that we've had to do during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, trying to adjust the model in which we make ourselves available to the public. So some of the offices may not be a brick and mortar shop anymore, but we may still be in those communities working out of local libraries, for example. How many are currently open, at least, you know, on set number of hours a week? I would need to confirm, but I believe it's in the range. I think it's either 9 or 10, I believe.
And what does somebody do if they can't get online and access the portal?
If they cannot get online and access the claimant portal to file their claim, they can call our UI Claim Center to get assistance in filing. We try to do that as a little bit of a last resort because it becomes more challenging for us to actually file the individual's claim for them. We don't collect as much information. When you're just going back to what you were asking about what we collect regarding work search, we don't have the capacity to collect as much information. And, you know, with our system limitations, we prefer individuals to file. But in the event that, and it depends on what is the reason. Is the reason because, you know, our portal is down for what we presume to be a defined period of time. And then if it's a Monday afternoon, we may ask the person, hey, please try back again tomorrow. You have until the end of the week, Friday at 4, I believe it's 4:30 on Friday to file your claim. But in the event that somebody the portal is down, they cannot access it, or for some other barrier preventing them from being able to do so, we can take their claim over the phone.
And so is it marked if you take the claim over the phone? Like if a person doesn't have a computer that allows them to access the portal, and they have to repeatedly call to make their claim, is that indicated on the record? And how does it affect the record?
So we would, in most instances, ask the claimant, you know, there has to be a pretty significant barrier to prevent the claimant from being able to file their own claim. And what I mean by that is we would say, you know, what would prevent you from being able to file online? And if they say they don't have access to a computer, we would say we have a local career resource center that you can go to file your claim. In the event that the person is, you know, I live in an area that does not have a career resource center, for example. I mean, we have the capacity to then help them or assist them. We also have an IVR that people can file their claim without having to speak to a representative. And so we can go that route if we need to. There isn't, I don't recall, and I would need to confirm, I don't believe there's any designation in the system that we could enter to indicate that somebody meets that. So there's not an indicator, if you will, that we would just look at. What we could do is we have notes associated with each claim in our system. And so the customer service representative could see within the notes that, you know, this individual has a barrier and they have been approved to file over the phone, for example.
Thank you.
We have a Commissioner of Taxes coming in at 10 o'clock. I'd like to be able to take a break before then, but Representative Kraft.
Mine's 2 seconds. Do you have a like a fraud line, like report, you know, like with Social Security, like where they have, if you see a fraud, like, do you have a line where people can tattle on people?
Yes.
Tattle line, you know?
Yes. So you can submit fraud tips via our webpage. We have information on our website that you can do that. Somebody can call as well. Those become challenging to investigate, though.
Sure.
I mean, unless there is, you know, in most instances, if you say Cameron Woods filing and they're not reporting wages, if we don't have anything else to go on, it's very difficult to actually investigate that. We can call Cameron and say, hey, we heard you're not reporting wages. But if they say, yeah, because I'm unemployed, we don't have much else to go on. So we do have the ability for people to report that to us, though, yes.
And real quick, you said staffing challenges. Are you hiring or, no, I'm not looking. But I'm saying, are you, like it's because you have open positions but can't fill them, or is it just capped at, like you just don't have the capacity?
A part of our struggle in that regard is funding.
Okay.
So yes, we are hiring. Yes, we have open positions. Yes, in some of our units, we struggle to fill them currently, given the labor market that we're in. But our program integrity unit, for example, has, I think, a staff of 10, and it's fully staffed. But I could probably use a staff of 20 if we wanted to investigate everything that we wanted to investigate. But we don't have the funding that would support adding 10 additional staff for that.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Representative Labaudy.
Thank you. A lot of your small mom and pop store, you can go in and get an application and fill it out and hand it back to them and you talk to so-and-so. But a lot of your other employers, your larger ones like the Aubuchons, the Walmarts and whatever, they don't take applications. You got to go online.
Right.
So you fill it out online and it goes to their home office, wherever that might be.
Right.
And then, and then now when you're filling it out, it asks, who do you talk to?
Right.
What's an individual supposed to do when he's not, or they aren't actually talking to somebody,
Yeah, this is a great question. And this kind of goes back to what I was alluding to a second ago about the limitations of our current system. I believe, and I would need to validate this, I believe you can enter online when you fill that out, and we would accept that. But that is one of the challenges that we run into, for example, right now with our current filing. It says, who did you specifically talk to? And a lot of employers, especially, as you mentioned, representative larger employers, it's a centralized application process where you're not going in and actually talking to somebody anymore. And so that's one of the things that we're looking to update as we move forward with our new system.
And you said that you don't recognize Indeed as a job contact, but some of those employers, when you file, you got to go through Indeed to be able to fill out your application. So you may be going to a Walmart, but they're using Indeed,
Right.
So that doesn't count.
Yes, sir. I agree. It's a challenge we need to get over. Very quickly, I know you're looking to take a break. I wanted to share just some numbers with you so you have them. So we as a UI program are expected to have an improper payment rate below 10%. So I want to make sure the committee is aware, you asked me to speak about fraud and you're focusing a little bit more on fraud, but we also have just improper payments in general. We pay people improperly, usually because of an error on behalf of one of our clients that we're interacting with, either the employer or the claimant. But we do make improper payments as a general matter, and not all of the improper payments are fraud payments. But we would still expect somebody to pay back an improper payment unless it's because of a department error. So when I looked at 2016, 17, 18, and 19, kind of leading up to the pandemic, and our fraud rates ranged anywhere from less than 1% in 2019, going back to 2016, we were at 4.9%, so closer to 5%. And then when you're talking about dollar figures themselves, it ranged anywhere from 4.9 million on the higher end down to 1.4 million on the lower end. So, I think it's within the realm for you to expect fraud rates of, 5% or less. And depending on the amount that you're the amount of usage of your program, I don't know what the projections are of the bill that you have in front of you of what the usage is. But, the dollar figure can get into the millions of dollars for sure. And again, you need to be looking at not just fraud rates, but improper payments as well. And again, we have a whole team dedicated to that, to those investigations. It's not a simple matter.
So the improper payments don't include fraudulent payments.
It would include fraudulent payments, yes, sir. Yes, sir. But so, in order to determine something was fraud, we have to make a determination that somebody intentionally or willfully misstated material facts related to their claim. And so, for example, fraud would be, I'm working and not reporting my wages, and we would say, why? And the person says, I didn't want you to know, But even in some instances, if they just said, well, I just didn't, I didn't know. And we say, well, we asked you on a weekly claim. Like, it asks you, you have to enter a number. And so we would potentially find that to be fraud. If somebody said, I was reporting net, not gross, and we look at that and we find out, yep, you were actually entering information in on a weekly basis. It matches your net payment from your employer instead of your gross. We would determine that you may have been improperly paid, and we would expect you to potentially repay that back, but that may not rise to fraud. So then when you get to fraud, you have additional penalties that are associated. So we would expect you to pay it back, but then we add a 15% penalty on top of that. And then potentially fraud penalty weeks, which goes down a rabbit hole. But
Anything else you'd like to add?
Very, very detailed topic. 30 minutes is very quick, so I'm happy to come back if the committee would like to talk about this. Again, I would just, if the committee's moving this forward, just understand, I think the vast majority of people are going to interact with the program, and utilize it for the purposes that it's designed, but you will have people out there that are going to try to defraud it. And I would also, again, just highlight for the committee the concerns that we're experiencing now with the identity theft piece as well. And you're going to have individuals trying to attack the system to gain access to the funds. And just keep in mind, we experienced this during the pandemic when economic times are worse and, workloads go up, the fraudulent activity increases pretty significantly as well. But happy to come back or answer any questions that the committee have.
May I ask you back once we go down those rabbit holes?